The UK government has stepped in to take control of British Steel, passing emergency legislation to keep the Scunthorpe blast furnaces running. Daniel, the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, says it was a case of national interest. But is this industrial intervention a savvy safeguard, or simply postponing a hard landing?
Probably the latter, in my view. I mean, the fundamental problem with the British steel industry at the moment is nothing to do with ownership. It's not a question of whether the steel industry is owned by the government or owned by private companies. It is simply a question of thermodynamics, in that steel is a hugely energy intensive industry. And in Britain, we have some of the highest industrial electricity prices and energy prices in general in the world. And this is a situation that has got much, much worse over the last 20 years. So if you go back to the mid 2000s, industrial electricity was about a quarter of the price it is today. Whereas in many other parts of the world, you have seen energy prices remain stable, or in some cases drop. So in the US, industrial energy prices are roughly the same as where they were 20 years ago. And this just makes it very, very difficult for the British steel industry to compete. And the government taking over this plant in Scunthorpe isn't really going to make any difference unless they act to, cut the input costs.
Albie, I mean, do we need to be making our own steel? After all, as Daniel was saying, it's very expensive to do that here. And there are countries around the world who, for their own reasons, are actually subsidizing the costs of steel manufactured there. India, China, most famously. Shouldn't we just be welcoming the fact that we can buy cheap steel from these other places?
Well, there's certainly a utopian free market argument that, well, if the Chinese government are willing to subsidize their steel industry, why would we turn away that sort of opportunity of getting cheap steel from China or cheap steel from India? Because those governments are subsidizing those industries or having regulations that the British people would never accept. So the steel industry is a lot more unsafe in those countries. They'd have to pay them as much. We could just buy all of that steel because it's a lot cheaper. There's certainly that utopian free market argument that might have been an argument that would have been sensible to make in the early 2000s or the late 90s, when it looked like we were all sort of moving towards this liberal democratic direction. China was opening up its markets. We sort of thought the whole world was going to be remade in the image of the West. That hasn't gone so well over the past 5 years, and certainly not over the past 10 to 15 years. So other people would argue, actually, it is very important that countries in the West, whether or not it's the UK, countries like the Netherlands, Germany, the Nordic countries, the US, Canada, etc., have their own steel making capability, because steel is so important to almost every aspect of infrastructure, whether or not we're talking about energy, railways, house building, all of the things that I think all three of us want to see in this country, a lot more of, all require steel. And I think the other point that I would make is that I think if the UK was to lose this last virgin steel making plant, we'd be the only country in the G7 not to have virgin steel making capability. Now, of course, we could just import from another country, but I suppose the question is, if the Netherlands can have a steel industry, why can't the UK have a steel industry? And the government over decades has created regulatory and economic conditions that have made steel making unviable in the UK. And I think that can probably be reversed.